Hello, my name is Lisa Courtney, and I'm an environmental planner with BM Ross and Associates Limited from Goderich. My colleague, project engineer Andrew Garland, and I are going to go over the work completed to date on the Growth, Water, and Wastewater Servicing Master Plan for the Township of Huron-Kinloss. Please note, we will also give this presentation at an open house scheduled for Wednesday, November 16th between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. in the social room at the Ripley Arena. During this presentation, I will give an overview of what master plans are and how they're used in terms of growth and infrastructure planning. Following that, I'll go over the forecast of population and housing growth for the settlement areas in Huron-Kinloss. Then I'll turn it over to Andrew to review the reserve capacity analysis done for the water and wastewater systems and review future capacity needs. Andrew will also discuss current and forecasted water storage needs as well as the wastewater collection and water distribution systems. Following that, I will review wastewater servicing options for the lakeshore area and the infrastructure projects identified to date, and then finally go over the next steps in the master plan process. Master plans are a tool that are available to municipalities to help them plan for infrastructure that may take place over large areas and over longer periods of time. A master plan can look at a single infrastructure system, like say a transportation network, or look at multiple systems at the same time, like water and wastewater. Master plans, completed through the municipal class environmental assessment process, can be customized to suit individual needs. For example, they can be done at a broad level to identify future projects over a long period of time, or they can go into very specific details and investigations. Regardless of the approach, master plans can help inform other studies, and then concepts from the master plan can be incorporated into other documents such as official plans and zoning bylaws. A common type of master plan are growth and servicing master plans, which examine growth and options for water and wastewater infrastructure that might be needed to service that growth. Typically, future infrastructure projects are identified, as well as the potential timing and costs of those projects. Often these studies are used to help plan future capital work budgets and serve as a game plan going forward so that growth is addressed proactively instead of reactively. This master plan has been undertaken to examine future growth and determine the water and wastewater needs associated with that growth. The first step in the process was collecting background information on historical growth patterns, as well as land uses and planning issues. We also worked with council and staff to identify a vision for future growth in Huron-Kinloss, specifically in the three settlement areas in the township, Lucknow, Ripley, and the Lakeshore area. This master plan will look at growth in these areas and then look at what servicing needs there will be and what strategies can be used to help the township budget and plan for future growth. There are a number of steps in the master plan process. As I previously mentioned, the first step was collecting and analyzing the available background information. The process also includes consultation with review agencies, First Nation and Métis communities, as well as the public. We started the consultation process in July when the notice of commencement was issued, and are continuing efforts through this presentation as well as the open house that's been scheduled. The next step was to examine available growth scenarios and population forecasts to identify the potential amount and location of growth in Huron-Kinloss in the future. Then we looked at the current capacity of the existing water and wastewater systems and compared that against the forecasted growth to determine potential infrastructure needs and options. Once the needs are identified, we will look at when these projects should be implemented or started, and if there may be any additional study requirements as well as potential costs where and when possible. This report was the first step in the process, and it summarizes the background information collected. It can be found on the Master Plan section of the Have Your Say HK website if you'd like to have a read. The background report looked at land uses, vacant lands, historical growth and building activity, changes in permanent and seasonal occupancy, initial reserve capacity calculations, the form and function of the three settlement areas, as well as a review of constraints and opportunities for development in and around those settlement areas. This report is essentially the groundwork for the master plan. These are the three settlement areas in Huron-Kinloss: Lucknow, Ripley, and the Lakeshore. These areas are the main focus of the master plan, and this is because these areas have municipal services, as well as local, county, and provincial policy direct future growth to these existing settlement areas. On the left, we have Lucknow. The dotted line shows the current extent of the settlement area, which starts just west of Mary's Restaurant and then goes east beyond Porter's, and then extends to South Kinloss Ave in the north and to just south of Canning Street in the south end of the community. The map in the middle shows Ripley and its current settlement area. It extends roughly from the elementary school in the west all the way to the lagoons in the east, and then north and south along Huron Street. The lakeshore area includes communities such as Point Clark, Blair's Grove, Bruce Beach, and Huron Heights, and is shown here on the right. The current boundary is Lake Range Drive to the east, Amberley Road to the south, and then all the way to Saratoga Drive, which is the boundary with Kincardine in the north. Both Ripley and Lucknow have municipal water and wastewater systems, whereas the lakeshore has only municipal water services. For the master plan, we looked at a range of growth forecasts to determine what low, medium, and high growth might look like over the next 25 years in the settlement areas in Huron-Kinloss. The low forecast is based on the annual average number of building permits that have been issued for each area over the last 10 years. The medium forecast is a forecast that was done for the Nuclear Waste Management Organization as part of their base condition studies and is a forecast for Huron-Kinloss. And the high forecast are projections for Huron-Kinloss done by the County of Bruce for their official plan update. For the medium growth forecast, the population for the township as a whole is forecasted, so we had to allocate the growth in terms of population and households for the different settlement areas based on the current distribution of the population. In addition to looking at the population, we also forecasted the number of new houses in terms of equivalent residential units, or ERUs. One ERU is equivalent to a single detached home, and an apartment, which generally tends to have fewer people and therefore lower sewage and water flows, is a little more than half of an ERU. So you will see this term throughout our presentation. This slide shows the forecasted growth in terms of equivalent residential units for Lucknow over the next 25 years. The graph shows the three forecasts, low, medium, and high, and then the table on the side shows the forecasted additional number of units. Under the low growth scenario, an additional 50 units are forecasted. Our medium forecast, which if you recall is the NWMO forecast, actually forecasts a higher growth for Lucknow than our high forecast, but both predict generally over 200 new units in Lucknow over the next 25 years. Currently in Lucknow, there are 91 units proposed for development, with an additional 42 existing lots that could be built upon. There's also approximately 50 hectares of land that's either zoned residential or future development, which could accommodate over 750 additional residential units. These development areas are shown on the map on this slide. Given the amount of land available and forecasted growth, it does not appear that an expansion to the settlement area of Lucknow will be required or needed over the next 25 years. In Ripley, the number of new residential units forecasted over the next 25 years ranges from 75 units on the low end to 252 units under the high growth scenario. This map shows the potential development areas in Ripley. Currently, there are 310 units of proposed development with 18 infill lots. There is 11 hectares of land zoned either for future development or residential development. Given that the high growth forecast is 252 units over the next 25 years, and the high number of potential lots in the community that could develop, there appears to be sufficient space in the current settlement area for the next 25 years of growth. Moving to the lakeshore area, you can see the forecasted growth is much greater compared to Ripley and Lucknow, with the low forecast projecting 584 additional residential units over the next 25 years, and the high growth scenario forecasting an additional 666 units. Historically, most of the growth in Huron-Kinloss over the last 25 years has occurred along the lakeshore. This is likely due to the availability of land as well as a desire to be close to the lake as well as Kincardine. Over the next 25 years, it's expected people will continue to want to build and live along the lakeshore, and that there will be high demand in this area. Currently, there are approximately 140 proposed and unbuilt units in the lakeshore area, as well as 195 existing vacant lots. There's approximately 42 hectares that's zoned residential, which, assuming a density of 5 units per hectare, would accommodate an additional 210 ERUs. Given this, over the next 25 years, there appears to be a deficit of land to accommodate the projected growth in the lakeshore area. If we look at the high growth forecast, the additional space required to accommodate the forecasted growth is about 24 hectares or 60 acres. This will likely require an expansion of the settlement area boundary over the next 25 years. These maps show the potential development areas in the lakeshore area. They start with Point Clark on the left and then move north as we go over towards the right. As you can see, there are relatively few future development areas in the southern area of the lakeshore, south of the 6th, and much more potential lands for future development in the northern area or north of the 6th concession. When an expansion to the lakeshore settlement area will be needed will depend on the progression of development, or how fast development occurs. But before it can be expanded, a settlement capacity study will be required, as well as amendments to the Bruce County and Huron-Kinloss official plans. As part of the background report, we looked at what constraints and opportunities there may be related to an expanded settlement area in terms of a potential location along the lakeshore. Some parts of the lakeshore have a very defined physical boundary created by the hill or shoreline bluff, and there are other constraints that we also considered, including hazard lands, wetlands, woodlands, as well as minimum separation distances from existing barns. We also needed to look for areas near existing infrastructure, as leapfrogging development is generally frowned upon from a planning policy perspective, as well as not being a very efficient use of infrastructure or very cost effective. In order to find areas where there may be fewer constraints, there might be an opportunity to expand the settlement area, we created maps where we essentially layered on different constraints. The red and orange areas have more layers of constraints than the lighter green areas on these maps. These particular maps show the areas from Concession 6 south to Amberley Beach. Between Pine River and Concession 2, the area east of Lake Range is constrained, and this is primarily due to minimum distance separations from the barns that are there, which would make residential development in this area particularly unlikely, and there are also hazard lands associated with the Pine River. These maps show the northern portion of the lakeshore development area. On the left side, we have a map that shows the area from essentially the boundary with Kincardine south to Concession 10, and then on the right side from Concession 10 south to Concession 6. On these maps, you can see on the east side of Lake Range Drive, on the north and south side of Concession 12, is an area with large or a higher number of constraints, and this is associated with a wetland and woodland area known as the Stewart Swamp. North of Concession 10 on the east side of Lake Range is a potential area for future consideration of a settlement area expansion. As we can see, there's relatively few constraints there, and it is near existing infrastructure and well away from any existing agricultural facilities. I'm now going to turn it over to Andrew to discuss the reserve capacity analysis.
When analyzing the potential impact of growth on existing water and wastewater infrastructure, and assessing needs for new or expanded infrastructure, we talk about reserve capacity. This is focused on treatment for both water and wastewater. Water storage is also assessed, though in a slightly different method. Total reserve capacity is effectively what amount of a treatment plant's capacity is not being used by existing real customers. Uncommitted reserve capacity is calculated as total plant capacity, subtract the existing usage, and subtract the usage that's forecasted for development commitments. Existing usage is taken from recent actual data, and forecasted use is based on typical water demands or wastewater flows for an equivalent residential unit, or ERU. This table summarizes available or rated total capacity for major water and wastewater infrastructure. Also summarizes current usage, current total reserve, and how much of that reserve is allocated to commitments. Finally, the uncommitted reserve in terms of meters cubed per day, as well as what number of ERUs that cubic meters per day represents. Key takeaways from this slide are, for water supply, all systems have a significant uncommitted reserve. The Lucknow Wastewater Treatment Plant is operating at approximately 75% of its capacity. More than half of the current total reserve is committed, with the uncommitted reserve being sufficient for an estimated additional 100 ERUs. The Ripley Wastewater Treatment Plant is operating only at about 60% of its capacity, but there is nearly as much committed capacity as there is existing actual usage at the plant. As a result, there is a perceived deficit of nearly 100 cubic meters per day of reserve, which in this case is also approximately 100 ERUs. The next several slides will illustrate each of the water and wastewater treatment system capacities and projected usage over time as growth occurs. Graphs will illustrate capacities in terms of current ERU usage values. Lucknow water treatment capacity. Looking at the left-hand side of the graph, currently we can see there are approximately 675 ERUs serviced. The committed capacity is a little over 800 ERUs, whereas the total capacity would allow for over 1,100 ERUs. At even the most aggressive growth forecast, the existing system capacity would be sufficient beyond the year 2045. Therefore, there is no apparent need for capacity expansion at this time. It is noted that well number 5 is not in an ideal location due to its site size, and replacement would likely occur at an alternate location yet to be determined. Lucknow wastewater treatment capacity. The same existing and committed ERUs apply as for the case of water treatment. Even though uncommitted reserve is sufficient for only 100 additional ERUs, at even the most aggressive growth forecast, the existing system capacity would be sufficient just beyond 2045. Ripley water treatment capacity. The total capacity of the system is significantly greater than the committed capacity. It is again noteworthy that committed capacity in Ripley is nearly double the actual current usage, due to the large number of development commitments that create no real demand at this time. At the most aggressive growth rate, the system capacity would be sufficient well beyond 2045. Ripley wastewater treatment capacity. This plant is considered to be overcommitted, despite current flows being well under the total capacity. Though the number of development commitments is large, the fastest growth rate projection forecasts that actual flows to the plant would not reach the current rated capacity until approximately 2039. It is recommended that this situation be monitored with regular updates to the reserve capacity calculations. When planning for future plant expansion, it will be important to keep in mind that the process, all the way from class environmental assessment to completion of construction, may take 3 to 5 years. Lakeshore water treatment capacity. The total capacity of all well subsystems in this drinking water system is substantially greater than current, committed, and forecasted demands. Looking at water storage capacity, the storage facilities for all 3 drinking water systems were reviewed. Ripley has a relatively new elevated water storage tank, and there will be a new elevated water storage tank in Lucknow in the near future. In both of these communities, the new tanks have sufficient volumes for decades of forecasted growth, The lakeshore drinking water system has a single water standpipe with a total volume of approximately 1,500 cubic meters. The actual volume available to the system will be less, depending on the location of the demand, due to pressure loss as water flows from the storage facility to the location of the demand. Regardless, even if the full volume of the lakeshore standpipe were available for use, it would be less than that recommended by Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks design guidelines for drinking water systems. The recommended value for existing customer base plus commitments is nearly 4,500 cubic meters, or 3 times the current standpipe volume. In summary, for the Ripley water storage and treatment analysis, the existing infrastructure is considered adequate for the forecasted needs. For wastewater treatment, the plant is considered overcommitted. There are a number of items the township may want to consider in this regard. One would be to implement an allocation policy. The goal would be to avoid being in the current position, where the township is committed to provide servicing capacity without any way of knowing when the subject development lands will actually be developed, and no mechanism to recover that committed capacity for developments that don't proceed in a timely manner. This could be achieved by having a time frame during which approved developments must occur, or else committed capacity is lost, or by having developers pay upfront to be granted capacity allocation. We also recommend the township review the reserve capacity calculations on a 5-year basis at most, and more frequently if development begins to occur at faster than forecasted rates. Wastewater treatment plant capacity expansion may be required in approximately 15 years, assuming the high growth scenario. Given the time required to complete the process from class environmental assessment all the way through to construction, it may be warranted to commence the EA in approximately 10 years. A final note on the wastewater plant capacity expansion is that the current plant is a lagoon-based system with treatment requirements that were established many years ago. An expanded plant would be expected to produce a higher quality effluent, and the required treatment technology would differ from that of a lagoon-based system. The actual treatment requirements and the preferred technology would all be established through a class environmental assessment process. Regardless, at a high level, in today's dollar figures, we would anticipate an expanded and upgraded plant would cost in the order of $10 million to $15 million. We also completed a review of the Ripley water distribution system and trunk wastewater collection system. The figure on the right illustrates the water distribution system and development areas. In general, no issues of significance were observed, but it is noted that available fire flows at the east end of the community is limited to values less than typical industrial land targets. This is a result of water main size leading to this area and lack of water main looping in the area. Future development lands at the south and southwest part of the community will require water main looping to provide adequate pressure under peak demands and adequate fire flows. The figure on the left illustrates the wastewater collection system and development land areas. Again, in general, no issues of significance were observed. It is noted that due to topography, a portion of future development at the north end of the community would require a sewage pumping station for sanitary service. In summary, for Lucknow water storage and treatment, the existing well capacities and forthcoming elevated water storage tank will be considered adequate for the forecasted needs. For wastewater treatment, the plant may reach capacity in a little over 20 years under the high growth scenario. It is recommended that reserve capacity calculations be updated on a regular basis along with those for Ripley. Eventually, when a wastewater treatment plant expansion is required, we note similar comments apply for Lucknow as they did for Ripley, namely that treatment requirements and the necessary technology to achieve those requirements will differ from that of a lagoon-based system. Though further study is required to establish what an upgraded plant would look like, we would again suggest that an upgraded plant may cost in the order of 10 million to 15 million present-day dollars. The water distribution system and trunk wastewater collection system for Lucknow were also reviewed. The figure on the left illustrates the water distribution system and development areas. In general, no issues were observed, though it is noted that future development lands at the eastern limit of the urban boundary are remote from the new storage facility site and are beyond a current dead-end water main. Proper servicing to this area would need to consider adequate looping of water main. The figure on the right illustrates the wastewater collection system and development areas. Two items to note. 1. Future development lands at the eastern limit of the urban boundary would be serviced by a new sanitary sewage pumping station, discharging directly to the treatment plant. 2. There are two sewer sections discharging to Ingalls Street that are at minimum size and capacity. While we believe it is likely that these sewer sections have a combined capacity that is sufficient for development lands in the western part of the community, it will be desirable to properly direct development land flows in a way that allocates flow where the sewer capacity is available. For the lakeshore water system, supply capacity is considered adequate for the forecasted growth ranges. Additional water storage is recommended for the current customer base as well as for development. Selection of a preferred location and type of storage would be carried out through a class environmental assessment process. At this time, general initial comments with respect to siting a facility include a preference to locate north of Concession 6 in order to spread out the existing and new storage facility locations. The next slide illustrates key areas of the Lakeshore North and South systems, along with some comments in this regard. In addition to spreading out multiple storage facilities, it is ideal to locate storage adjacent to large diameter water main. This allows maximization of the storage facility during high demand events, for example, a fire demand situation. This is achieved by locating near existing large diameter mains if possible. For example, note the existing standpipe on the right-hand side figure. It's near dark blue and red color water main, which denote larger diameter pipes. A new facility in the north would ideally be located near existing large diameter mains. Alternately, new trunk water main would need to be constructed, connecting the new facility to existing large diameter pipe. It's also ideal to locate storage on higher elevation grounds in order to maximize the use of existing topography. This would allow greater flexibility in consideration of different storage facility types, for example, an elevated storage structure or a reservoir with a booster pumping station. Locating at relatively low ground elevations would almost certainly require a reservoir and booster pumping station. Although further study is required to confirm many of the details associated with a new storage facility, we would suggest that the township consider probable costs in the order of $6 million to $8 million for additional storage, plus whatever costs are associated with connecting the new facility to the existing system with new water main.
Currently, in terms of wastewater servicing along the lakeshore, the majority of the area is serviced by on-site private services, otherwise known as septic systems. There are a small number of residences in Inverlyn and Huronville, as well as along Boiler Beach Road, that are connected to the Kincardine sewage system. Under the provincial policy statement, there's a hierarchy of services, with full municipal water and wastewater services being the preferred method of servicing for areas of new development. Private services are the least preferred form of servicing. Where municipal services aren't feasible or available, private communal systems are the next preferred option. Partial services, so in areas where you might have municipal water and private septics or vice versa, are only permitted in limited situations, such as infilling and minor rounding out, and where there are no negative impacts over the long term. If an expanded settlement area along the lakeshore is required, a servicing strategy for wastewater will be needed. We have identified 4 potential servicing strategies or alternatives to be considered for the lakeshore area. The first is status quo and maintaining private services. Under this strategy, infilling in the existing settlement area could continue, and it's expected that the septic inspection program would also continue to demonstrate and address concerns around long-term impacts given the concentration of septic systems in the area. It's unlikely an expanded settlement area would be permitted, and that this would ultimately limit growth in the lakeshore area. A second option is to extend services from Kincardine. An extension of sewage services to the entire lakeshore area is not likely given the distance as well as the potential amount of capacity that this would take up at the Kincardine treatment plant. Potentially, if an expanded settlement area is within a reasonable distance of Kincardine, it could be serviced, but Kincardine does have its own capacity demands and needs, and given this alternative is not considered likely or feasible. A third option is to construct a new sewage treatment and collection system to service either the entire lakeshore or a portion of it. Servicing the entire lakeshore area is generally not considered feasible due to the very high cost of a collection system, as well as the lack of a potential treatment facility site. The fourth option is a combination of the existing status quo as well as a communal system. Under this scenario, the existing lakeshore area would remain on private septic systems, and the expanded settlement area would likely be serviced by a communal or decentralized sewage system. Of the 4 wastewater servicing strategies for the lakeshore, the fourth, which was use of private services in the existing settlement area as well as a communal or decentralized system for an expanded settlement area, is considered the most practical and feasible. Under this strategy, it would allow for continued development in the existing settlement area on septic systems, but it is expected that the septic inspection program would need to continue in order to demonstrate the active management of the systems in the area as well as the absence of any long-term impacts or issues. Any future expanded settlement areas would be expected to require a decentralized or communal wastewater treatment system. The exact type, size, and location of the system would ultimately be dependent on the proposed development. And at the time of developing this decentralized or communal wastewater treatment system, consideration would have to be given to potential technologies as well as how the system will be managed. So in terms of ownership, financing, as well as operations and maintenance. It's expected that before any system is built, that it would require consultation with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, as well as a Schedule C municipal class environmental assessment. As part of the master plan, we've identified a number of projects that we would recommend the township consider over what we've called the immediate future, the near term, which is 5 to 10 years, and as well as the long term over the next 10 to 25 years. In the more immediate future, we recommend that the township consider developing and implementing an allocation policy for water and wastewater. Such a policy would direct how water and wastewater capacity gets allocated and how long that capacity is essentially held for, as well as we recommend that in Ripley, given the theoretical overcommitment of the sewage capacity, that the wastewater reserve capacity calculations are monitored or updated on a 5-year basis. Over the next 5 to 10 years, it's recommended that the township consider adding additional storage to the lakeshore water system. This will require a Schedule B municipal class EA for a new storage site. as well as it's recommended that the well in Lucknow, well 5, is replaced, and that's based on its age and condition. Over the longer term, so the next 10 to 25 years, it's recommended that the township consider preparing a settlement capacity study, which would examine, where the lakeshore settlement area could be expanded. And then over kind of a much longer term, we might be looking at potential expansions of the Ripley wastewater treatment plant in and around 2039, and then Lucknow towards 2045. The timing of when to start the EAs and studies that would be required ahead of constructing these expanded facilities will ultimately be dependent on how development progresses. The next steps in the master plan process include incorporating any input and feedback we receive during the open house or following thereafter. We'll prepare the master plan report and present it to council. Once council gives us the thumbs up, we will finalize the report and issue the notice of completion. Once that notice of completion is issued, that starts the clock on a 30-day public review period. That concludes our presentation on the Growth, Water, and Wastewater Servicing Master Plan for Huron-Kinloss. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. You can email me at lcourtney@bmross.net or by telephone at 519-524-2641. If you could please submit any questions or comments by November 30th, that would be most appreciated. Thank you very much.